In 1944, Uncle Carl wrote, "It is impossible to establish a full range of meaning with an individual symbol. The investigator must turn back to periods in human history when symbol formation went on unimpeded. That is, when there was no epistemological criticism of the formation of images, when facts that were unknown could be expressed in definite visual form." Let's take Jung's advice and roll back the clock. Hopi mythology is a secret kept by strict oral tradition. Well, it used to be. Recently, the last chief elders found themselves rare and facing extinction, so they decided to pass their knowledge onto the world. Well, to Frank Waters. The resulting Book of the Hopi is as strange as it is wonderful. Let's dive in. Mixing earth with her saliva, two twins were molded into form by a primordial spider woman. She dressed them with a cape of white substance said to be her literal wisdom. Finally, she sang a song of life over them and pulled off the cape. There were two. And they immediately asked the main primordial question, why? And she answered. To the one on the right, Pokan
Hoya is Pokan Hoya. Palanga Hoya is Palanga Hoya.
Pokan Hoya, she said, "You are meant to help keep order. Go around the world and put your hands on the earth so that it will solidify." To the one on the left, Palanga Hoya, she said, "You will help with life and echo the creator. Go around the world and send out sound so that it is heard everywhere." Doing so, Righty-Tighty sculpted high mountains to be hard and challenging, leaving the lower valleys still a bit soft, so that the life to come would call it mother. Lefty Lucy, however, sang like Aretha Franklin, a sound so powerful the whole earth trembled, quivering until properly in tune. The vibratory sensors along Earth's axis responded in harmony like strings reaching pole to pole. And the poles were their next stop, where they keep the globe properly rotating. It should be noted here that the modern notion of ancient people having a geocentric cosmology is just plain false. But save it for the comments, that ain't my battle to fight. Next, it was time for the final touch, human life. Taking out specific hues of earth, black, white, red, and yellow, she molded humanoid forms, apparently not realizing this was hella racist. She brought them to life in the same way as the twins, but this time in a dark purple light that reveals the grand mysteries of creation. When the light turned yellow, she breathed life into them and they awoke. But there was a wet spot on their foreheads that was still soft, like the valleys. The light was turned red to dry and harden it until they were ready to proudly face their new father, the sun. But the humans were missing something important. Spider-Woman forgot to include speech. She called for help from her creator and said, "I have created people. They are fully formed, firm, and properly colored, some more than others. They lack proper speech to praise the creator and enjoy life." Responding to this, her creator, Satupnang, gave a different language to each color, apparently not realizing this was also hella racist. The time came to get real with these new humans and tell them the cold, hard truth, that multiple worlds have come and gone in a fashion of trial and error. The first by fire, second by ice, and third by water. Because the human beings meant to be gardeners and custodians of Mother Earth always seemed to forget their purpose. A contagious ignorance that had to be wiped out and reset was a reoccurring recursion. You see, the vibratory lines harmonizing the earth were also placed within human bodies, a micro version running down the center of their backs where the cape was. This sensor line was in tune with Mother Earth in order to carry out a plan of creation, a plan too abstract for human understanding. So they started tuning their own vibrations to however they saw fit, advancing, but through ignorances. The further you go, the harder it gets. These words of advice from the Spider-Woman rang out through the land, to the few ears that were not deaf to it. As most people traveled higher up and further out, those wise enough to hear were told by Sutukneng to open their kapavi, a vibrating door at the crown of their heads, that would give them the wisdom to see and follow a particular cloud, an orb of light that at night appeared as a star. Droves of people started disappearing from the native land as they followed the star vapor to subterranean caves hosted by ant people. They lived in stasis in the underground realms of Inner Earth while Sutukneng pummeled the surface world, rearranging its organs like he was Liam Neeson going ham on Pam Anderson. He moved the water where the land was, and the land where the water was. To navigate the Agarthian dark, the Hopi used the kapavi that they had on their doorheads to see clearly and communicate silently. When the food ran out, the ant people stopped eating, a heroic effort of self-sacrifice to ensure the continuation of humanity. So feel grateful. We're important, even though we aren't permitted to know why yet. After rebuilding the surface, Sutukneng congealed into solid form and introduced the eager Hopi people to the fourth world, saying, "I have washed away the footprints of your emergence. The stepping stones are now gone with the proud cities and flying machines to the bottom of the sea. But if you preserve the memory and meaning of your emergence, those stepping stones will surface again and prove the truth you speak." To paraphrase, don't fuck this up, alright? The fourth world was fully material with a solidified density unbending to change, meaning humanity could no longer communicate through their doorheads, and this was it. No more Control-Z. If humans could survive here, it proves that the divine spark could thrive anywhere. A select few maintained alignment with their divine purpose, passing the original meaning from generation after next to those strong enough to carry the torch, yet wise enough to keep it hidden from the profane, who will only use its flame to burn. Distraction begets, indeed, and the profane began chasing more and more specific interests. They created problems for the sake of solving them with even more complex problems. They treasured their own creations so much they forgot why they created them. They fixed what wasn't broken with tools that easily break, just to make more tools to fix those. And the further they traveled, the higher the walls got, until they could no longer see the valleys from which they came. Hopi mythology is hard to ignore in two indistinct ways. One, symbolically speaking, the twins seem to illustrate processes of the left and right brain hemispheres. The singing of creation songs that harmonize humanity to Earth showcase an understanding of the Schumann resonance and cymatics. The vibratory centers of various color within human backs from a white cape lines right up with the Hindu anatomical depiction of chakras. And indeed, pure light is white until it passes through a prism, or a human. And two, literally speaking, Sutukneng switching the locations of water and land reminds us of the fossilized sea life found at the peak of Mount Everest and a plethora of megalithic temples found in the ocean. The sequence of time cycling into a fourth world of highest physical density directly parallels the four yugas of the east, of which Kali is said to be our current. The twins dividing in two and each taking one of Earth's poles indicates an understanding of the planet's rotation and magnetic field. The depiction of a doorway in their heads opening and closing depending on the light source is a damn good description of where and how the pineal gland works. This list goes on, etc. But here's the thing. This unignorable list of certified Hopi street cred begs a pestering question. Why do we treasure the exciting details of ancient knowledge while simultaneously ignoring the proposed meaning? A relic in a museum is a trinket on a shelf, refurbished, bought, and paid for, sold to the highest bid at the cost of human life. Welcome to the fourth world. Living in flesh makes us yearn to return to a primordial source. So we run towards something or anything to recreate that sensation, never realizing that source is waiting for us in the stillness, and that all of our progress is actually running away from what we need by chasing what we want, usually power. This is why utopia doesn't work. When life has no problems, we create our own out of sheer preferences, making clear why every culture, including Hopi, had a labyrinth archetype. Think about it. The Hopi knew that Mother Earth provides everything we need and that it's simple. But when one person starts advancing an illusion of progress, it imposes a burden on the others to have to keep up. This progress compounds mathematically untraceable meanings on top of prior meaning, wanting on top of wanting, cashing in on personal preferences until eventually it becomes illegal to live off the land, and we are completely disconnected from the roots of our actual needs. What is a bank? What is insurance? What is a stock market? What is a financial report? What are any of these things when compared to the basic needs of humanity? Top-heavy, complex distractions at most, and temporary in the least. It could all collapse tomorrow and not be remembered in 2 generations' time. And if it does, our Primordial Mother will be there to catch us. Because she remembers. The question we should ask ourselves is, how good is our memory? Hi there. I'm a 2-dimensional pixel-compressed version of Joey, cut up, spliced, and edited to fit an entertainment/quasi-educational format on a delightful platform called YouTube. Do take notice that I just described YouTube with the word platform, meaning a solid surface raised up and meant to stand on. This term works perfectly to describe what YouTube is, despite not adhering to that definition. Today, we will be dissecting the lesser-known implications of living in a self-made simulation called a hyperreality, and how to free ourselves from it to achieve the kind of liberation depicted in myth and the esoteric traditions. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's episodical existential crisis is brought to you by Library of the Untold, a show right here on YouTube. Let's watch a short clip. A show right here on YouTube. Let's watch a short clip. A show right here on YouTube. Let's watch a short clip. A show right here on YouTube. Let's watch a short clip. A show right here on YouTube. Let's watch a short clip. A show right here. Okay, knock it off. When we think of living in a simulation, our mind fills with archetypes of computer programs and sci-fi worlds of alien overlords. The argument is convincing. They say if we can create simulated realities, then others can too. Given ample amounts of time-space, this suggests that it is statistically mathematically probable that our universe is nested within one of an endless string of alien software simulations. The problem I see with this is right there in the first argument for it, thus easily overlooked. If we can create simulated realities, then yada yada. The entire hypothesis is hinged on the assumption that these so-called others are just like us and apt to do exactly the same things that we do and have only done recently. We are literally painting our mortal intentions onto ineffable beings completely unknown and hypothetical in the first place. This is ethnocentric ego on steroids, and frankly, a slippery slope into nihilism. Sure, the universe is holographic, but like we talked about last episode, that's just the nature of the quantum universe. As the mystics made clear, it's all natural, baby. However, we certainly do live in a simulated reality, but the beings running the code are far more local than our sci-fi culture would imagine. Because, like Prey, our culture only looks out and not in. Let me explain. Simulacra. A word that needed birthed because no previous words did the job. Unlike terms like platform and ethnocentric, we can't always just say a word louder and or twist the meaning to fit current times. A problem that confronted Uncle Carl often, and DMT users ever since, is that new revelations are abstract and require entirely new vocabulary. A simulacrum is a copy of a copy of a copy and so on until there is no longer an original. Think of a map of Atlantis drawn from a previous map drawn from another, and then it sinks, like a Titanic ship or the ship of Theseus. Another helpful example that goes, if you change out every board on a ship and put the scrap in a separate pile, which one is the ship? Now, for that to be a simulacra, it would have to keep happening until eventually it's no longer even a boat and no one remembers the original purpose of why they're replacing the boards. Simple enough, until we realize what this loss of meaning means to us psychologically. Jean Baudrillard made clear implications in a lesser known book, taking up only a few frames of our favorite Matrix movie, the sequels of which are case in point. The implication? Once we psychologically identify with the simulacrum, we detach from what we need the most, meaning. Let's take a look at some examples, but a quick heads up. We will be starting out innocent and fun to paint a picture. These examples will be getting more and more existentially frightening as we go. Make no mistake, just writing this was pestering. This is the kind of subject that will leave you questioning your own identity and mourning the reality of anything existing in the first place in a way that can really sneak up on you. Okay, let's dive in. Have you ever wondered why the icon of a telephone on your screen is still a telephone? The icon to save a file is a floppy disk, and an electric car charger looks like a gas pump. We are now advancing faster than we can archetypally keep up with. Let's take a trip to the happiest place on Earth, Disneyland. Humans used to build castle towers. Some of them served very mysterious megalithic purposes that today's logic just can't explain. We've talked about this before. Philip Callahan did some research that indicates the towers have resonant systems that collected electromagnetic energy from between the earth and sky. This was inspired by based studies of how insect antennae do exactly that. The differing levels of mass and density creates pitches like glasses of water or the resonant stones of the Great Pyramid. This replication of insect biology would create a human antenna for the meditating people within. The round towers proved to be powerful amplifiers in the alpha brain wave region, 2 to 24 hertz in the electrical anesthesia region. The highly amplified waves occur in the meditative and electrical anesthesia portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is of utmost significance. In 1963, G. Walter researched brain EEG waves from 0.5 to 3 hertz. Delta region, and found anti-infectious effects. Additionally, subjects whose brain were bathed in low-energy electromagnetic fields while wearing a modified helmet experienced a profound otherworldly presence during the research sessions. The ancients may have seen the electromagnetic forces of the universe as a single common denominator of nature. These castle towers found their way into mythology, dripping with valuable meaning. The message? To meet your goal, you have to go through an archetypal labyrinth equivalent, because everything you desire to complete your soul's journey is on the other side of fear. Then this became fairy tales. To get the maiden at the top of the tower, you had to slay the dragon at the base. It's a tower, only one way. There's no over, under, or around it. Still very meaningful, but as we know, the old school fairy tales are a bit dark, hence grim. This then became Disney movies. Same meaning, but watered down, leaving out the blood, guts, and despair, but adding a ton of dicks. This archetype is already very phallic, guys. You don't gotta do that. Then money stepped in, and we mean business. Walt cashed in on kid bait by creating Disney World. The castle towers are still present, but this time made of foam and sized up utilizing forced perspective. The meaning has now become a pastel sense of awe, and a place for family cruise ships to stop on their way to Epstein Island. But then, you bet your left butt cheek you'll be leaving with a souvenir from the gift shop. A keychain with a depiction of a castle tower to remind you of your trip and possibly missing kids. A castle tower that now represents something else entirely. Somewhere along the way, we permanently forgot, the purpose of that original tower. And don't even get me started on these Halloween costumes. Shit don't even look like Pocahontas. Now, Baudrillard takes this a bit further, conspiracizing that Disney World is designed to be oversaturated with simulation in order to make the rest of our living and working world seem real. The idea is that adults, apt to critical thinking, are subject to childlike compliance when enveloped in an overt hyperreality. And you don't even have to go to Disneyland to be well aware of its existence. You bet your right ass, the kids will remind you often. So perhaps Gene is right. Like engagement rings, there is a false sense of guilt strategically placed on those who don't bother participating in this belligerent business model. It's not just Disney. Movies like Pearl Harbor and Titanic work as global perpetuations of history. By ignoring real research and sourcing from watered-down chronicles written by the winners, they can quite literally rewrite history in the collective mind of humanity. And the real Titanic story is a spicy one. More on that later. The reason a simulacra is dangerous is that it rids us of available distinctions between real and simulation, so we become blind to the obvious. That's important because if we don't catch a simulacrum emerging, the generation after ours will be born blind to it. This is Plato's cave allegory in plain sunlight. Sadly, those who know better will pounce on that ignorance with greed-bearing predation. Divide and conquer business models like social media will not hesitate to continue isolating us from each other by forcing their hyper-simulated companionship between us. If this goes unchecked, our children will be born into a world where it's abnormal to gather for fun or unite for a purpose. If that becomes a normality, those profiting will see a green light to buy laws that make it illegal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're already running prototypes on that. The hyper-reality of social media removes the gritty realness of living standards, making us feel inadequate. Then that assault is followed up by a plethora of ads offering products that promise to fill that gap. Meanwhile, there was never a gap. Almost sadistically ironic that we will name those very products after our own existential gaps. My favorite is Denali. As we develop more and more products, the technology changes, giving the illusion of progress. But if you pay close attention, the products are revolving in a cycle, mimicking the previous design. This works due to the planned obsolescence of things that were never necessary in the first place, but are now needed for an individual to keep up with life, i.e., you'll need to answer that email or phone call immediately, or your competitor will. Footnote, nothing in our evolutionary psyche has ever prepared us to be on call 24/7. Okay. Now that we are frantically scraping for the things needed to survive in a hyper-reality, the landscape that once provided everything can now be transformed into a marketing campaign. Reality is replaced with billboards, strip malls, road signs, pit stops, offices, and whatever other instructionals we are made to follow, without our noticing, much less our permission. Human life now revolves around a hyper-consumerism in order to revolve around human life. Now that we are busy in our hamster wheels, they can finally tell us what's going on in the world with, you guessed it, the news media. Now, I don't have to tell you that they are shaping our opinions for the sole purpose of division. That's not what this video is about anyway. But that news media is no longer journalists going to places and reporting on events. Instead, it's a recycled clickbait reporting on a report, reporting on a report. In fact, I recently saw an advertisement on social media selling an app product where you can make your own news media by copy-pasting headlines from whatever, any news site you want, slap a picture of a celebrity on it, and link it to another advertisement. Dude, we are surrounded by signs that refer to other signs. At this point, authentic living is nearly impossible without adapting to the hyper-reality and thus becoming it. The soul's thirst for the hero's journey archetype is not only cock-blocked, but illegal, leading to the darkest element of the modern state, scientific panopticon. David Fiddler, whose last name could use some work, authored an extraordinary book rich in esotericism entitled with a very straightforward word pun. In Jesus Christ, Son of God, he writes, "We are constantly surrounded on all sides by a remarkable tapestry of natural forms and ideas. Yet, despite the wonders of the universe and our unique powers to survey the realms of both mind and matter, we have been socially trained to concern ourselves with the smallest fragments of a larger reality, while our modern approach in both science and commerce is toward an ever-increasing specialization and toward conceptually rendering the fabric of nature into ever smaller fragments. The approach in the ancient world was different. Then, science, philosophy, learning, even culture itself developed from a spontaneous recognition of the beauty of the natural order, and from the realization that the universe of which we are all a part is a living whole. This is something we tangibly sense whenever we are confronted with the experience of beauty. The life of each civilization and every individual is influenced by underlying mythologies, whether sacred, scientific, secular, or profane. In our century, psychology has shown that those who do not believe that their lives are shaped by an underlying mythology are always the ones who are most captivated by its spell. The question is not how to get rid of mythology, but how to find the most beautiful and rewarding mythology so that we can live our lives on the highest possible level. The underlying mythology of the present age is based on the ideology of materialism, the notion that physical matter is the ultimate reality. This unstated yet dominant premise gives birth to a cultural ethos which is devoted to creating, for the most part, efficient workers and consumers, rather than encouraging the quest for deeper insight. In the beginning, there was the Word. Simpler times indeed. Or so we thought. Because turns out, the Bible doesn't say that. And like any simulacrum, it's complicated. Fret not, though. After getting down from the roof, Fiddler goes on to dropping straight bars. Word is a very inadequate rendering of the original Greek term logos. Logos has many meanings, but none of them is word, which is based on a translation of a translation. When the Greek New Testament was translated into Latin, logos became verbum. And when the English King James translation was made from the Latin version, verbum became word, twice removed from the original text. Since logos has so many meanings in ancient Greek, ranging from the scientific to the mystical, it is best left untranslated. Logos designates the power of reason or pattern to the ordering of things and the principle of relationship. In general, it has the following meanings: order or pattern, ratio or proportion, reason both in the sense of rationality and in the sense of an articulation of the cause of something, and a principle of mediation and harmony between extremes. This is interesting. This has Uncle Carl's Mysterium Coniunctionis written all over it. But let's not get sidetracked too much yet. We have been led to assume that logos is non-dual, that is, a singularity, the word. This has two important implications. A, this primordial logos emanated from a non-dual source, requiring a duality-based existence, a monad splitting itself into parts to experience itself, by speaking information representing itself into a void of which it is not. Naturally, the splitting apart was a distinct ratio, a golden ratio of non-repeating numbers that could go on forever without ever having to cycle back onto itself. Mathematics that ensure no direct copies are made. So every time it duplicates, its new twin has the full impression that it is its own thing independently. Every copy would be forgetful of its source creator. But there's a side effect. If those new sections attempted to create their own copies while ignorant of their source, they would be working with an incomplete chain of information. Duplications would inevitably be copies of copies instead of reflections of the original source. This feels really familiar, perpetually familiar, almost as if the Gnostic texts were, dare I say, scientific documents based in undiscovered mathematics. I digress. And B, you forgot there was two parts, didn't you? Yeah, me too when writing this. And B, this translation of a translation collapsing into a mistranslation might be the defining moment that separated science from spirituality. Let's think about it. It's no secret that these two studies used to be one. We talk about hermetics all the time here. But modern science is based in a dualistic reality where reactions take place as causal. Translating the Word of God as non-dual would surely undercut any spiritual notion from what we clearly observe in the mechanics of today's science, the source of which would be put aside as anti-existent because it can't be measured. What if this swipe of the pen simulacrum is what took God out of the math equation, only to re-emerge later under a different name, a hypothetical unified field? This disconnect would not only have modern material science chasing a copy of a copy, but would easily catapult it into simulacra. In other words, a business model. In any case, we are ignoring a core causal reality structurer in every moment that we are alive, due to being cut off at that particular ratio. This forgetting has us born blind and separated. Perhaps this elusive thing that we call enlightenment is just a matter of how good our memory is. Hold on. Don't go into the quote break yet. I know it feels right on that line, but I'm feeling a little empty about it. Let's see if we can collectively jog our own memory using the same theme. The prologue to the fourth gospel is the Bible's way of introducing this logos in a familiar way. Jesus Christ, our main homeboy, JC, is said to be the embodiment of this, and he himself insists that we ourselves can remember as well. Turn with me now in your Bibles to John 1 through 18, and let's replace the word and world with their original Greeks, logos and cosmos. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So right there we have the Logos is just itself. There was a man, one sent from God, whose name was John. This man came as a witness to bear witness concerning the light, that all might believe through him. He was not himself the light, but was to bear witness to the light. It was the true light that enlightens every man who comes into the cosmos. He was in the cosmos, and the cosmos was made through him, and the cosmos knew him not. So right there we have the mission of the Logos. As many as received him, he gave power of becoming sons of God to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Logos was made flesh. Going in here, we have the Logos incarnate. It goes on. The Logos was made flesh and manifested among us. John bore witness concerning him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, he who is to come after me, he has been set above me, because he was before me. Of his fullness we have all received grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." You'll notice that this had 3 steps, so to speak. 1, the Logos just is. 2, the Logos has a goal or a mission. And 3, the Logos incarnates itself into flesh to accomplish that mission. It should go without saying that this 3rd one is where we get a little tricky. Like, what are we supposed to do with this amnesia, right? Okay, now let's slap on the quote break. I'll see you in a minute. Right about now, you might be asking, if science and religion were one, why is the Bible not scientific? Well, depending on who you ask, it kinda is if you consider it to be written in code. See my boy Bill Donahue for more on that, or this episode that we did. But why would any knowledge be in code at all? Is it to hoard power? Well, not really. I mean, sometimes, but not necessarily, especially with occult knowledge. Sallustius explains this secrecy well in his wise treatise On the Gods and the Universe. To wish to teach all men the truth about the gods causes the foolish to despise, because they cannot learn, and the good to be slothful, whereas to conceal the truth by myths prevents the former from despising philosophy and compels the latter to study it. So, it's kind of nice, right? It's like, well, I guess some things never change, but it's about preservation. You know, we don't want Sean getting a hold of this stuff, or he'll run around spouting it off and make a fool out of all of us. Guilt by association. You've seen TikTok. Oh. But what if there were parts of the Bible that leaned into ancient science and pattern recognition? If so, that would certainly fill in some holes and remove a lot of the superstitious stigma attached. The Book of Jubilees is not a Gnostic text, but it's also not canon either. In it, a mysterious, undescribed being called the Angel of the Presence narrates it directly to Moses, one of many beings who test and tamper with people on earth with God's permission to serve heaven's greater plan. You know, kind of like Satan, but let's reel it in. It's known as the Little Genesis because it seems to go through and explain various parts of the canonical Bible that frankly just don't make sense, making it a very, very sacred text once upon a time. To say it was followed strictly is an understatement because Jubilees was keen about pattern recognition. The pattern recognition needed to line up with natural law, seen as divine order. For example, time. Jubes was all about those sevens, and for good reason. it fits the true solar year. 7 weeks of 7 years fits nicely into a Jubilee of 49. The reason it works? Each year was 364 days, divisible by 7, and each of those 12 months had 30 days total, despite being solar. It's kind of neat. Jubilees insisted that time had dimensional space and form, long before you saw the recent memes. You know the ones. This calendar was a carefully measured representation of our place in the cosmos. It reflected the zodiacal macrocosm directly, linking us, its microcosm, to it. So no matter what we did or planned to do, it was harmoniously in tune with the causal. Except, of course, in the case of sin. Using the wrong calendar was considered sin, but not because of some religious taboo. It was said that life on Earth should be in sync with the heavens in order to harmonize. To jive correctly, human people needed to be little microcosmic heavens, a true reflection of it. There are many complex layers in this multifaceted cosmos. Angels, who are each responsible for particular forces of nature, just want to keep things tidy. Basically, what we now call sin wasn't about God liking or disliking things. He didn't have silly preferences and favorites like we are taught. That never made sense anyway. Sin in Jubilees was a term for wavering from the mathematical ordering of life's pattern. Think of your body and all of its complex components working together to make you all good. You wouldn't want any wavering in there either. After all, that's the definition of disease. Speaking of disease, it's commonly known that many potential foods were forbidden. In Jubilees, swine, camels, rabbits, reptiles, fish without scales, and any creature already dead, carry on, were a no-no. This isn't superstition to a dietitian, as all of those animals are prone to deliver parasites to humans. Also, eating bugs was forbidden, so we'll have to bring that up, when the time comes. This all makes sense if you consider that sin, as they say, is what separates us from God. So-called sin has always been a barrier between us and heaven, the garden, unification, liberation, all that. We aren't guilty of being bad, but instead just out of tune, off kilter with the divine ratios. Cattywampus, if you will. So, what's the problem with Jubi anyway? Well, its removal was due to a rabbinical attempt to unite everyone under one religion, their religion. This is obviously before our main OG JC stepped in and went all Highlander on their ass. Gang shit. You see, Judaism kept track of time with a lunar calendar, kinda Simulacra-ish, but when uniting people, the calendars are gonna have to be all synced up. So Jubilees was tossed due to its direct solar orientation. Moving forward, every damn demiurgious human leader in history wanted to add their personal view of time to the mix by creating their own calendar based off the previous. The result is another simulacrum at the very core of our time management, with 28, 30, and 31 day months, leap years, daylight savings, this and that. In fact, the prefixes sept, oct, nav, and dec literally mean 7, 8, 9, and 10, not 9, 10, 11, and 12. Thanks, Julius. The point is, after so many copies of copies, we can no longer even see the original. So an attempt to switch back to a steady solar calendar would cause absolute disorder. But damn, because the sun was and is synonymous with source, symbolically and scientifically. Aligning with it is a surefire way to stay in tune and in harmony with the above mentioned ratios. We see because of it, we get all of our happiness brain chemicals from it, we look fine as hell, because of it. Our pineal gland activates when our body catches it. In fact, everything we eat is a product of sunlight, something that really should never be replaced with any simulacrum. But here we are, strolling down the aisle of Walgreens, picking out our favorite fruits and veggies. Now that, my friends, certainly would have been a sin. Jean Baudrillard obviously had a pretty sharp eye that habitually cut right through bullshit. This makes it really hard to ignore his wild claim that the Gulf War never took place. As said in his book, The Gulf War Never Took Place. Oh boy. That, like any simulacra, it was a running simulation to perpetuate business and control. The way this is done is with fear, of course. But the way this is accepted is with a tool that serves as the biggest, loudest, and most misleading simulacrum of all: education. Come on, let's get spicy. Jean was a top academic and a college professor, so his critical slant on education is no he said, she said bullshit. I think you'll find his opinion after a lifelong career of teaching as brutal enough. Here's my take on it. A diploma makes you credible. You get a diploma by passing a test. You pass the test by reaffirming what someone else has told you is right. So, logically, credibility now means how well one can stick to a script. This was, and still is, a brilliantly executed way to sculpt the future hive mind of humanity. And let me tell you personally, I've had my nose in quite a few books now. Some of the dumbest ones are authored by a name followed by that string of acronym letters: PhD, MD, PG-13, MDMA, YMCA, whatever. And some of the deepest are authored by some dude just bursting with inspired awe. Guess which one of the two goes into our curriculum? Do me a favor. If you ever meet the Buddha, Siddhartha, and he tries to share his wisdom, tell him, hey, whoa, slow down. I'm gonna need to see some credentials first. Where's your certification of wisdom there, bub? A great mind has never needed a diploma. It transcends that bind with a cerebrally hygienic education that tends to knock hard. Perhaps you'll remember, a while back we did a 3-part series on ancient mystery schools: Initiate, Priest Kings, and Stairway to Certitude, some of my personal favorites. One of the many invaluable nuggets taken from that subject is the concept of graduation. That term, with its capital G, used to have very important meaning. It meant a self-certitude in respect to the greater good. Basically, the initiated passed a deeper test, a test of selfhood and grace. A new wisdom was attained, ensuring the student could be trusted to go out into the world and leave everything he touched a little better than when he arrived. This graduation meant that he was tempered in his diploma, exuding it from his very bones. There was no need to wear it on his sleeve or attach titles to his name. He simply was it. Safe to say, this is no longer the meaning of graduation. Not only do we wear our diplomas on our sleeve, but we wear them as a mask, meant to be the first damn thing people judge you by, instead of the wisdom of your character. Once we've earned the badge, we shed the incentive to contribute to the greater good. The motivation becomes inflating the badge. All of a sudden, and I mean literally the phrase, before you know better, it represents itself as an institution rather than the responsibilities that birthed its necessity. This badge, now an asset of value, goes on to become monetized. You can buy diplomas now from just about any institution you want. So the unsaid meaning of education is how much money mom and dad have on you. Qualifications measured and judged on monetary luck rather than intelligence and character. The diploma has decayed into what an Instagram badge literally is. Like our calendars, we can no longer even see the original meaning. So our core values, real world worth, and basic human needs are viewed as abstractions. Nowhere is this trouble more clear than the public reaction to Uncle Carl's most grandiose alchemical codex, Mysterium Coniunctionis. Said to be Uncle Carl's most difficult book, readers insist that every notion put forward in it is brand new despite being starkly factual, with little to no speculation. But how can that be? If it's a doctrine of sheer reflection of the original human psyche, wouldn't it be an easy read? Well, nope. That's how disconnected we are from ourselves. In fact, the book is so difficult yet profound that there are published lectures on it, and then there are books about those lectures. I mean, damn. So let me tell you about one of them. Edward Edinger talks about Mysterium in a way that reminds us of our subject today. I'm book salesman at this point. Those periods in human history when symbol formation still went on unimpeded, one could fantasize at liberty and describe the phenomena of the outer world as seen in the test tube or the retort. One can't do that anymore in modern science because there is, to use a fancy term, epistemological criticism. When a distinction is made between the subjective source of data and the objective source of data, that's epistemological criticism. But the alchemists lacked that, so their symbolic nature flowed freely into their descriptions. And as the result, we have this marvelous panorama of the objective psyche unfolded before our eyes. Mysterium describes the anatomy of the psyche. It is a book of facts, not theories, and it is difficult for us in the same way that an anatomy book is difficult. I was suddenly confronted with this sea of facts, each of which had a strange, unfamiliar name. To grasp the facts of anatomy, one has to experience them. Go into the dissecting room and start working on a cadaver. Then the facts in the anatomy book take on meaning because you can relate them to something that you can actually see. Psychologically, we get the same experience from analysis, primarily from our own analysis, our own self-dissection, so to speak. The objective transpersonal psyche is shining through unconscious material constantly. But if we are totally preoccupied with the personal dimension, we'll only be able to see the personal aspects of the material. The objective psyche shines through. You can't point it out to the analyst hand, however, if you don't see it yourself. That's one of the great values of studying this material, alchemy. You learn to see the imagery of the objective psyche. Do not identify with them personally. Not so easy when the conflict is raging inside you. If you manage to do it, it changes the whole situation drastically and changes you. By disidentifying from it, a psychological situation is set up in which a third, reconciling possibility can emerge, and often does. It doesn't have any room to emerge, however, until the ego has ceased to identify with the conflict. Let's clarify right there that this is not to be confused with solipsism. It's not all in your head, but instead a psychological process that is directly entangled with the outer world. Alchemical manuscripts make this easy if we understand the language of the symbolic. Ed, our living simulation of Uncle Carl, elaborates on one in particular. This is a very interesting image that grows on you as you reflect on it. If, for instance, we think of it as a photograph of the sun in its 4 stations of the yearly cycle, we must ask who could have possibly taken this photograph. It would have to be a quadruple time-lapse photograph, wouldn't it? In other words, that picture has to be taken from a position outside of time. Now, time and space are categories of consciousness. They do not apply to the unconscious. It is an illustration of the fact that opposites are transconscious. Here, they are pictured in a setting that is trans-temporal, beyond the categories of space and time. Kinda like our logos. The same emerges from Eastern Mandalas, where self is the circle or point in the center, and the outer temporal world surrounding us is represented by squares with right angles. Right angles that end in a sharp point, just like our triangular Mercurius figures, aiming to pierce through the psychological dams that we have built within, and flood the mortal mind with a deluge of original primordial muscle memory, begging the question, can we remember who we are? Simulacra is everywhere. And like a fish first finally noticing water, once you see it, you can't unsee it. There are famous people who are famous because of their fame. As Gene B said it, publicity has become its own commodity. Technology serves up adventure to keep us from realizing our own hero's journey. Advertising is no longer about a product, but its own image, the ad itself. Science studies result, not the causal, just like medicine treats symptoms, not the cause. And social media, like modern academia, replaces our basic psychological needs. We have no one to blame but ourselves. Utopia is too easy, and heaven just isn't hot enough. So we drift, springing in prideful strides away from the natural ordering ratios of a mathematical god called logos and time-space. Each unit of progress is another step further from source, thus further from enlightenment. It all adds up to a subset, a total loss of actual meaning. And absence of meaning has heavy psychological impact. It erodes human thought and diminishes critical thinking. That is, if it's not recognized. What if Simulacrum is actually a good thing? What if it's a natural discourse of human evolution? Stripping the individual from their own personal hero's journey might just set the course needed for a globally shared hero's myth, testing and tempering humanity as a whole. We read directly from a couple books today, none of which were actually Gene's Simulacra and Simulation. Perhaps you catch the pun. But Gene's book surprisingly ends with a little hope, enough to turn this mood around. You see, when living in a world dominated by hyperreality, the only things that still hold meaning are those that highlight the decay of those systems. In a world of corruption, the only rebellion left is to live authentically a life of kindness and love. There is a reason we came into the earth realm in a wet, electrical, fragile suit of emotions. We stray far away from source, really testing the limits of our soul's boundaries, only to eventually return again and again, stronger and stronger. This is a cornerstone of every religion, even Abrahamic ones if you dig around enough. The biggest difference coming from esoteric tradition, alchemy, and the mystery schools is whether or not we can overcome our living amnesia while wearing this emotional suit. That is, to remember pure, unobstructed source while we are way out here, cast like bait to archons of jealous fury and the temptation of muses who thrive on the fringe of the furthest reaches of this cosmic mandala. To remember who we are while stuck in the flesh is how and why we die before we die. All of a sudden, and I mean before you know it, The simulation is no longer a trap, and a simulacrum becomes the greatest tool to see through the illusion, a quickening, so to speak, because this tool is alchemical in one very important sense. Once you see through the walls of your cube, you can't throw it in reverse, Terry. Neti, neti, a Buddhist axiom meaning not this, not that, works to back engineer our logic. A kind of process of elimination that leaves us with nothing left but the original selfhood. Self-subjective initiation isn't strict to just Eastern mysticism and Western alchemy, but is, I think, illustrated best in the mythic wisdom of the Native Hopi. When each successive period of development concludes with catastrophic destruction to world and mankind, he passes on to the next. The four lower centers, as they successively descend in man, decrease in purity of consciousness and increase in grossness of physical function. In the fourth stage of development, he reaches the lowest and midpoint of the journey. The fourth world, the present one, is the full expression of man's ruthless materialism and imperialistic will, and man himself reflects the overriding gross appetites of the flesh. With this turn, man rises upward, bringing into predominant function each of the higher centers. The door at the crown of his head then opens, and he merges into the wholeness of all creation whence he sprang. It is a road of life he has traveled by his own free will. He has traveled by his own free will, exhausting every capacity for good and evil, that he may know himself at last as a finite part of infinity. Ignoring the fact that that sounds just like the Eastern Hindu Kundalini chakra system, but on the literal other side of the world before boats, we can learn multitudes from this passage alone. It reminds us that we must be parted from what we depend on in order to grow. This is why Jung describes the archetypes of the orphan and the widow as intrinsic to everyone on the process of individuation. Like Uncle Carl said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. This is why our Gnostic Sophia wandered off from the perfection of Pleroma to experience confusion through amnesia, and to see if she could still create wholeness while untethered from her consort, the monad. Moving in perfect sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, and 144, etc. But all the while ignoring the very source that makes those numbers exist in the first place, the zero. The reason for Phi's infinite compounding growth is built into itself as an unquenchable thirst to return to zero. It is a living and evolving reaction springing from the absence of the zero, or rest. And this is where Simulacra can really sneak up on you, as either A, existentially terrifying, or B, as a beacon of hope. Because a simulated reality means that meaning, past, present, or future, is entirely programmable to those who are initiated into understanding its code. Is that a stretch? You want proof, don't you? Well, the best I can do is declassified CIA docs, quantum science, and a story of Titanic proportions. Come on board, and let's get our feet wet. Itzhak Bentov discovered new physics indicating rest is synonymous with perpetual energy, that zero and infinity are just front and back to the same coin. A coin with no boundaries in space and no restrictions in time. A coin that paradoxically fits right in your pocket. And we are all carrying the same currency. We'll come back to that. The Titanic, an unsinkable ship and a symbolic icon of ironic disaster. If you know the story of the Titanic, you don't. Because this event, like Gene's Gulf War, never took place. The egregious lore of the Titanic is alive and sustained by our frames of belief, like a demiurge god that eats mass worship, i.e. required recognition to exist in the first place. The things we believe in become real, living and eating entities, born from us, but live just outside of our familiar biological experience, space-time. Okay, now hold that thought too. The double slit experiment and measurement problem showcases undeniable retrocausality in a seemingly impossible result known as the delayed choice paradox. Basically, particles behaving in the past are intrinsically influenced by future controls. Future controls imposed by human activity, measuring, weighing, counting, fiddling, all that stuff. This is confusing to our logic even in a controlled lab. It's extra confusing when it happens in the real world. Just hold on, juggle that one too. Home stretch, baby. You've heard of several real-world impossible coincidences, like the weird parallels between President Lincoln and Kennedy, the old comic book of a face on Mars drawn decades before it was discovered, the adventures of Baron Trump, you know, all that stuff. Theories ignite wildly because of these strange happenings and might lead to real conspiracy. I don't know. But what is for damn certain is that 14 years before the Titanic sank, there was a book about it. A book called Wreck of the Titan. A book that accurately runs through the events of the Titanic down to the very location. It not only told the future, but is more accurate than the blockbuster movie that works as its cover story. Because the Olympic, known as the Titanic, sank with particular passengers on board who were on their way to audit the central banking system hell-bent on taking over the New World. Those who profited from and were in cahoots with the new central bank canceled their tickets to board the ship last minute before anyone could notice. Thus, the new central bank never caught hands from those potential checks and balances and is now running wild in this house without our notice, much less our permission, with a dollar that we don't remember the original meaning of. The Hopi warned us about this. Greed and corrupt power over human life. Something the movie didn't touch on. But the book, well, it's the moral of the story. The meaning of the original story. A story that has since been widely erased and replaced with a captivating simulacra. A story we can all learn from as a unified species with amnesia. That is, if we can ever get our memory back.
Distance and spaces